Welcome to the Sample Chapter Podcast, the show where authors read a sample chapter from one of their books. Here's your host, Jason A. Meiske.
Hello, Sample Chapter listeners. Welcome to episode 303 of the show. Hey, this week I'm very excited. I'm going to be introducing you all to Scott Michael Powers. Author and blogger Scott Michael Powers traded a long career as a political journalist to write about more reasonable topics, UFOs, murders, conspiracies, and ghosts, and as a novelist and short story writer. He has long been active in the Florida Writers Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to promoting and supporting literacy, writing, and reading for both adults and children. Now living in a nondescript neighborhood with big trees in Orlando, Florida, that features easy drives from theme parks, beaches, natural springs, rockets, and excellent margaritas. He loves his hats and is a rocker at heart. Ladies and gentlemen, help me welcome to the show, Scott Michael Powers. Hello, sir. How are you today?
Great, and thank you very much. It's very kind of your introduction there, Jason. How are you today?
I'm good. And that's all right. I mean, I just kind of read off what you have on your website, which actually there was a whole lot more to it that we could dive into. And you have a fascinating background.
And I use a lot of that background in my plots. So I'll come across the most bizarre stories, came across the most bizarre stories as a working journalist over the years and tucked them away and figured someday that's going to show up in my fiction.
There you go. I've come to learn over the years, my own opinion is that is what all the teachers and experts have meant when they said, write what you know.
Yeah.
Because I used to think, what do I know? I mean, okay, I know how to fish. I know how to do this, but how do I make that interesting? I'm not Hemingway. And, but then I slowly started picking up on tidbits from jobs and other things. And I was like, oh, okay, put my experiences into my writing and go from there. Was that something you would agree with?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, all of us that wind up being writers find out that the more we live, the more we can really incorporate that into our writing. Not to say that young people can't also be great authors, but some people take it a little too far, though. I had a good friend back in school. We both wanted to be writers one day, and shortly after graduation, he got into some trouble and was convicted and incarcerated. And I went to see him in prison one day, and he said, "You know what? I'm just in here gathering stuff for my first novel."
So. Well, that's an interesting way to go about it.
Yeah.
It's one route. Oh my goodness. So you were a journalist then for 30 years and you covered a lot of interesting topics. What was something that stands out to you?
Well, I was blessed to have a lot of very interesting beats, and I mean, for a while I covered crime, as most reporters do at some point in their career. For a while I covered the environment, which led me to, at the time I was living and working in Ohio with the Columbus Dispatch, and there were some very odd things that had happened in the Buckeye State and a few other industrial states like it during the first few years of the Cold War that only came to be recognized and known really into the 1990s and later. For example, and some of this is some of the basis of my new book here, the U.S. government in a rush to develop nuclear technologies of all sorts with all kinds of things. Obviously we all know about the story of how the nuclear bomb was first developed, with Project Manhattan and all of that. But that spun off all kinds of smaller research projects that literally were being farmed out to little mom and pop labs all over the industrial heartland. And what you wound up discovering 30 or 40 years later was the federal government was handing out uranium and even fissile materials to these places all over the industrial heartland, to these smaller labs here and there, to see what they could do with them, to see if they could develop some sort of technologies with them. This led to a number of different tracks of nuclear technologies being pursued, and some of them ultimately abandoned. one of which involved a fissile material called uranium-233. Now, uranium-233 is derived from thorium, and I won't get into too much of the background of how all that's developed and whatnot. But back in the 50s, they were basically seen as three kinds of nuclear fuels: uranium-235, plutonium, and uranium-233. And they were all pretty much in a parallel race to see which one would become the best nuclear fuel. Uranium-233 lost and was essentially discarded and abandoned. And what happened was the federal government had these stockpiles, literally, of uranium-233 that they decided they didn't want to use anymore because, plutonium worked better. So these were literally left in places like the Savannah River nuclear facilities, or atomic energy facilities that we had pretty much largely forgotten about for 50 years. So my book, The Space Coast Tattler, I say, well, not everybody's forgotten about this stuff, right? Some of it is out there still. And I also knew from my research through my reporting in the 1990s and all this, that some of the record keeping back then was pretty sloppy. The record keeping was as good as the local guys, accountants, could make it, because we didn't, back in the 50s and 60s, none of this was computerized. We didn't have databases and things like that. We had paper records. And so there were any number of instances where the Atomic Energy Commission and later the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and the Department of Energy could not figure out what the hell happened to some of the stuff they shopped out there. It just, like, honestly, we think we got it back. Honestly, we think we have it all. So that's part of the basis of this. It involves a cache of sort of misplaced and eventually stolen uranium-233 that winds up becoming the basis of the plot of my book.
Wow. Oh my gosh. That's an amazing story already.
Yeah.
And then to just take those little bits and pieces, and I can see how that just gets the wheels turning already, and thinking, like, what can I do with this, or where can that go, or even where would it naturally go? Maybe. What you might be thinking. Wow. Okay. That is a lot of fun, and that's the Space Coast Tattler.
Right. The Space Coast Tattler and we pick it up from there. The Space Coast Tattler is a tabloid newspaper that I invented to serve the communities around Kennedy Space Center in Florida. This is on the Atlantic coast. So Cocoa Beach and Cape Canaveral and Cocoa and Merritt Island and Titusville and a couple of other small communities along there, clustered along there. There's a lot of rocket scientists that live in those areas, a lot of rocket engineers that work at NASA and also at the Cape Canaveral Air Force or Space Force Station, and they work for SpaceX now, and they work for Blue Origin now, and there's also a lot of tourists that live, the tourism area that goes on there, because you've got beaches and you've got resorts and you've got people that come for rocket launches, and on top of that, you've also got what still is incredibly hard to understand, but a very real depressed economy in that stretch of Florida, because NASA in the space shuttle heyday was a huge employer in that area. I mean, tens of thousands of people worked at NASA. And when the space shuttle program collapsed, or ended, really, actually, almost all these people lost their jobs. And so malls shut down and restaurants shut down and other places that serve the area shut down, and people moved out. And even today, with Blue Origin and SpaceX and some of the other private companies that have come in there to redevelop and rebuild a new kind of space program based on the private sector, you're only talking about maybe a quarter to a third of the employment that had existed in NASA's heyday. So there are literally thousands of people that had worked for NASA that are now working for McDonald's, places like that.
Oh my gosh.
Today. So there's this undercurrent of depressed economy that still exists in that area. And I thought this would be a perfect place for this newspaper, the Space Coast Tattler, to exist, where they concentrate on crime and they concentrate on entertainment and they concentrate on the daily picture of the beach babe from the beaches and whatever launches are going on. And within this sort of mystery plot begins involving the stolen uranium-233, and the only people that stumble on it are these newspaper journalists at this tiny little weekly tabloid newspaper that nobody in the world gives a darn about. But they happen to be good enough journalists that they can smell something going on when they find it, and that's where it goes from there.
That's fascinating. Yeah, and I like that. It's got that, a little bit of the underdog and
Yeah,
the reluctant hero sort of
right.
trope in there.
Absolutely.
So that's fantastic. And it sounds amazing. So, I mean, you worked for a long time as a journalist, so writing is kind of in your blood. Did you always plan to one day, like once you're retired, you were like, I'm gonna start writing novels? Was that part
I
of the
did.
plan?
Absolutely, I did. And um, back in college, I studied creative writing and journalism, and I got out and I got a job in journalism because it pays better right away. Although it paid crap, to be perfectly honest, but it's better than an unemployed author. So before I knew it, I had this long career in journalism, which I thoroughly enjoyed and have nothing but wonderful regard for. But the whole time I'm like, when am I going to get around to writing these novels that I always wanted to write? When am I going to start writing those? And it's kind of tough to write all day as a journalist and then come home and then try and write at night. And I guess that's my excuse for not doing it for 30 some years. Um, yeah, once I interviewed this chef and I asked him a really stupid question, but I got a really great answer out of it. I said, when you go home, do you cook for yourself? And he said, honestly, when I go home, the last thing I want to do is stand over a hot stove. And that's kind of how I felt as a writer. So around toward the end of my career, I finally started casting about on my first novel and self-published that in 2016. It's called The Roswell Swatch. And then a couple of years later, I finally retired from journalism and went full time into writing my novels and short stories, and have been very happy about that. Although, it's a tough business. It's a tough business to make money
Sure.
at it. So, I'm doing it through the safety of having some retirement pensions and income to rely on while I do it. So I'm very grateful for being able to do that. But still, it's my priority. It's what I want to do. It's what I'm doing.
Fantastic, fantastic. And it's one of those things that I think a lot of people would look at as like, well, you're a writer, so you've always been writing. I can understand you might get tired of it, but also I can see that those are two completely different animals. Being a journalist to a creative writer, um, how much of that? How different was that, and was it kind of freeing to not have to worry so much about got to hit these certain beats of it as a journalist compared to now it's all coming out of your head as a creation?
It's enormously freeing. Really, I feel, and I've had these stories that have been pent up in me for literally decades, and to be able to write at my own pace and please only myself and not have a daily editor leaning over my shoulder and that's the editor in this book, Mac McGregor, is what I don't have anymore. And the editor in the book, Mac McGregor, is sort of a composite of several editors that I knew over the years. I think if you read it you see how he sort of works with his reporter, you appreciate that relationship. And now that I'm free of that, doing what I want on my schedule. The other thing is, though, that I find kind of interesting as I move about among other fiction writers, that as a newspaper journalist, you've got a daily deadline. And some things do take more than one day. Some things take a few days or a week, and I've occasionally worked on long-term projects that take months. But nonetheless, you're pretty much wed to, you get to work in the morning and it's like, what are you going to write today? What are we going to publish for tomorrow morning's paper from you today? And
Right.
and that creates sort of an urgency to a writing style. And I do confess that urgency shows up in my writing style, and I'm okay with that. And I think I think that is something that distinguishes my writing methods and my writing style, not necessarily to the better. Certainly people that are able to go into luxurious takes on their writing probably create prose far better than mine. I'm not saying that, but it distinguishes my writing style for sure, I think.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and since you're doing thrillers with these books, I
Hmm.
think that urgency probably translates across the page,
I think it does
because you
too,
got to have,
the
yeah.
reviews that I've received seem to suggest that too, and I really appreciate when I see that. But I know where it's coming from. It's coming from I can't wait to get to it. I got to get to it.
Now, with so many ideas running around in your head, do you do more than one project at once, or do you just focus on one at a time?
No, I do more than one project at once. I've typically got a couple of novels working simultaneously, and then short stories that keep popping into my head, and then popping
Ah,
out of my fingers into my keyboard. So the Space Coast Tattler was started while I was finishing up my last novel, which was called The Murder Plague. And by the time I got the Space Coast Tattler finished, I had started my next novel, which is tentatively called Hotel Stella. So yeah, there's overlaps, and I just, we get a little bored with something, we set it aside. We've got something else that fascinates us, and we move on to that. And then while I've been trying to publish the Space Coast Tattler, I've been writing all these short stories and getting some of those out there. And I just published a collection of short stories as well. So
that's a lot of fun. Yeah, and I used to just focus on one thing at a time, and I'd make a little note and set it aside. But since then, I find it refreshing once in a while to just kind of follow the muse, work on something for a little while, and
mhm.
get that out, and then I can go back, and it's usually by then I've figured out, oh, I know where I wanted to go with this. Like usually about the
Yeah,
muddy middle.
yeah, absolutely. And sometimes you've got to let your characters tell you what comes next. And sometimes that doesn't happen right away. So you set it aside for a little bit, you go work on something else and go, you know what? I know what Guthrie wants to do next. Let's get back to that. And you do.
Yep. Yeah, I went from working in another room to now it's crazy, but I do a lot of my writing in the living room while my wife is watching reruns. And
Yeah.
her experience, as she puts it, of hearing me over there kind of talking to myself and sometimes laughing, she's used to it now, but she's like, it's so weird for how did she put it? She said it's weird to hear you over there talking to these fictional characters in your head, and to anybody else, it's like you're just talking to yourself. But she's experienced it so much now, she understands that. Yeah, I'm hearing that character. I've gotten to know my characters enough that they're telling me the story, like you said, and sometimes they can make you laugh, or sometimes I can go, oh,
Yeah.
they did that.
I love that you do that in your living room with your wife. And writers can all appreciate how that works. And that's just great.
Thank you. Yeah, it just kind of stemmed from, we didn't see each other too much, and she was always had work to do and other work to do, and then when she changed jobs and had more time, I was like, well, you know what, maybe I can just write in there, that way I can still pause and we can chat. And she's actually she has really creative ideas, and so
That's
I'm
great.
always asking her, like, hey, give me a name for this person, or what do you think I should do in this scenario, this person, and just right away, just snap, she's got something, and I look at her going, oh my gosh, that's brilliant.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I'm the same way. My wife Connie has more than once helped me solve a plot problem. Saying, well, how do I do this? I don't know what's going to. Well, what do you think she's going to do there? And then she'll tell me, and then that makes sense, and
Yep.
that goes.
The fun part is when she has a great idea, but I don't use it because it triggered something else of this
Yeah.
is what I had in mind originally. And the way she was describing it worked it out in my head was like, yep, I can go this way, but maybe I can still hint a little bit at what she's talking about. And then as I get done, she's like, oh, you put that in there. I was like, well, actually, no, but, and oh, she just kind of laughs it off anymore. All right. So let's see here. How many books do you have at this point?
4. I have 3 novels and 1 anthology of short stories.
Oh man, that is fantastic.
And
And
none of them is really connected, are connected. And I've had, as most writers do, I'm sure, people have said, when are you going to write a sequel to that one? And I said, well, the sequel just hasn't happened yet. So in my first book, The Roswell Swatch, is sort of it's a UFO mystery, a little like the X-Files, in that these people are tracking down clues about potential UFO visits, and what they have is a piece of a swatch of material that is purported to be a stolen piece of debris from the Roswell UFO. So that's the first one. The second one, The Murder Plague, is a dystopian novel involving a genetically altered disease or genetically altered virus that causes people to go into homicidal insanity. And then this is the third novel, The Space Coast Tattler, involving a domestic terrorism plot at Kennedy Space Center. And then my short stories are all over the map. So,
wow, that's fantastic though. I love that concept of here's this thriller and maybe there's an X-Files sense to it. Maybe it's just something, wild and out there, but it's still got that sense of believability, which I think really is what sells a good story.
yeah, and I work very hard to try and keep my science fiction elements believable and plausible. Not that I have anything against sci-fi books that go out there, but for my taste, I want it to be grounded in enough science that people say, you know what, that could happen.
Yeah. Now, do you like to keep them just grounded in that thriller? Things are fast paced, very gritty, or is there a little bit of humor mixed in?
I like to mix in humor, and I like to think of myself as sort of a dark humorist in many ways. So there are bits and pieces here and there that may not be laugh out loud funny, but I like to think they tickle people a little bit. So I include that everywhere I can in my books and stories.
Fantastic. Oh man, I love it. And it is there's so much great to offer. I had spent several minutes just kind of cruising through your website, checking out your short stories and then the other books you had to offer. Lots of great things. Where can people find and follow you?
Well, I have my own website and with a blog and links to my various books. It's at scottmichaelpowers.com. And then my books are available on Amazon under the name Scott Michael Powers. So that's basically it.
Yeah. Something I meant to ask here. I just looked at my notes and realized it. Do you have any dream projects, something that you've always been looking forward to that you haven't gotten to yet, or do you think you're already kind of living the dream?
I got it's like I think almost anybody that's out there writing thinks that they're a work in progress, and right now my work in progress is Hotel Stella. That's my dream project. So, when I finish Hotel Stella and maybe get that published and working on something else, that's probably going to be my dream project. So, in one way, it's like the children where you say, I don't have any favorites among my children. But literally, I think for me, anyway, I think for most writers, their current project is their favorite child. And That's where I'm at right now.
Okay. That's good. That's good to know, though. All right. Well, I have one more question for you here. It's a little bit different. It's kind of a would you rather.
Okay.
And I'm going through here, pulling up. It's just kind of randomly pulling up a different thing here. Okay. So today's would you rather. Would you rather publish one insanely great selling book and never write again, or publish a string of 15 average selling books over a 20-year period?
I would rather do the 15 average selling books over a 20-year period because I love the writing more than I love the selling the books. I mean, I really enjoy just creating something on my computer, and I don't want to stop.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Yeah. And I was thinking the same thing as I was going through. I was like, yeah, it'd be cool to have that, the sales, of course, and the freedom
Sure it
of,
would.
okay, bills are done. But still, I wouldn't be able to stop writing. I would just keep creating. I love that creativity, and I'm always doing something, whether it's my writing or painting fishing lures or doing something else.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, Scott, thank you so much. This has been wonderful.
Jason, it's been great. Thanks for great questions and just fascinating conversation we've had, I think.
It's my pleasure. All right, everybody. Well, that is the end of this portion of it, but don't forget to stay tuned. Come back next week when Scott joins us for a sample reading from the Space Coast Tatler. Until then, take care, everybody.